Welcome to the Hud Grad Club. I'm Chris Webb, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Career Consultant with the University of Huddersfield's Careers Employability Service. And, full disclosure, I'm also a University of Huddersfield graduate. So I've generally got pretty positive things to say about both the institution and any of our graduates. But don't take my word for it. In this podcast, we'll be meeting different members of the University of Huddersfield's global alumni community, finding out what makes them tick, about their experiences during their time at the university and their career journeys since completing their studies. Join us as we explore the inspiring, innovative and diverse range of individuals that make up the Hud Grad Club. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hud Grad Club. And Hamza, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Well, no, thank you very much for joining us. And I guess for anyone who's watching the podcast who doesn't know you already, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and when you graduated from the university and the course that you studied and what you're doing at the moment?
So I'm currently working as an electrical design engineer at UK Power Networks, which is a distributed network operator down south. Been working here 4 years now. Initially joined in the graduate program with them, and been here 4 years now. So my educational background is mainly bachelor's in engineering in electronic and electrical engineering. So I graduated in 2017 from University of Huddersfield. Went on to do a master's in engineering management with Coventry before finding the job with UKPN.
Fantastic. Great introduction. Nice and concise, which we always like because we've got loads to pack into these podcasts. And we start every episode, as always, with our greatest Hud story ever told section. So finding out a little bit more about how you ended up at the university and kind of some of your best experiences from your time there. So perhaps if you could start off by telling us a bit about, how did you kind of make that decision to come and study at Huddersfield?
Well, to be honest, it mainly had to do with the scholarship, if I'm being honest. Just like every other student, the university that offered the most scholarship at that time, I will probably lean towards that. And luckily for Huddersfield at that stage, I was getting a really good scholarship offer from them, which I took, which I grasped with both hands. And it's coming straight off my A levels, so I technically got the offer even before I gave my two exams. And it just worked out perfect for me. It was up north. So when you're a student, there are several things that you need to take into account. There's things like living costs, etc. And knowing that, I know London's quite expensive when it comes to the living costs, etc. So, well, it just seemed fair. Well, you're getting a good scholarship up north. Living costs aren't that high. So, yeah, put two and two together, and you have me here in Huddersfield.
Fantastic. So yeah, lots of thinking, behind it, kind of before you turned up. And what was the experience like? So, what were kind of some of the key memories for you from your time at the university?
Honestly, my time in Huddersfield was really enjoyed it. I mean, it was a real eye opener for me. Obviously I did my E levels down in London. So I did 2 years at South Thames College. And then when I moved up north, as I said, it's just I just thought, well, yeah, it's going to be a good change moving up north. First, people were really good, oddly. I mean, think the difference between the two things is the people in London don't genuinely have time for each other, whereas the further north you move, you realize, well, people are much more accommodating, they're more invested in what you're doing and how's it going in life, etc. But other than that, I think if you look at the university side of things, the university uh, I mean, it gave me a platform to build a strong career in electrical engineering industry whilst adding to my determination to expand on my ventures probably into the electrical industry, which at that time I know is an aging workforce. So a lot of focus has been put on, especially the power industry, to replace that knowledge gap, more or less, or transfer of knowledge more or less for us. So yeah, I mean the support that Huddersfield provided was instrumental. I mean, in terms of the availability of mentorship, knowledgeable staff, campus resources, and the amazing facilities.
Oh, fantastic. And we are going to flash up, I think, some photos kind of during the podcast for those
Yes.
kind of watching on video to reflect sort of your journey and your graduation, which,
Well,
is kind of great to see.
yeah, I mean, if you look at my time first from the was started first in the first lecture hall, it was completely surreal for me because once, yeah, I mean, you're used to the classrooms, but the lecture halls was something completely new to me, to be honest. So yeah, it was a good experience. I was a bit overawed with the occasion. You could tell from the photos. And yeah, uh, I mean, as I said, I only have good things to speak about my time in Huddersfield.
That's great. I mean, it's always a good positive start to the podcast. And I know we're going to dip into a little bit more now what you talked about earlier in terms of the job that you're kind of currently doing, and I guess really sort of how you got into that and what that transition was like, sort of finishing at university and then moving into kind of the graduate world. So perhaps if we start by telling us a little bit more about that. What was that kind of transition like when you finished university and moving into that world of work?
Um, to be fair, I had been working part-time whilst I was studying. So I was working part-time in the hotel as a customer service assistant. So, when I used to get my days off from university, like those big holidays, I was working full time. So I had that work mentality, getting up, getting on time. That was embedded in me. But in general, I think um, the main difference is that I felt, I'm pretty sure you've heard that a while, is whereas the university, you were paying the university to teach you stuff, whereas on the other hand, the company was paying you to use that knowledge or to use that resource more or less. So the transition was I wouldn't say it was smooth, but it wasn't that hard. Especially if you've been working part time, you have that sort of discipline in there. Then yeah, I think it just helps with the transition. But
Mm.
I mean, great credit to UK Power Networks and their HR team in terms of the graduate program that they did. So eventually they hired us as graduates on a 2-year graduate visa, on a 2-year graduate program, more or less. So the first 4 months we would essentially spend with the team that hired us. In this case, my team was UK Power Network Services, and I spent 4 months with them, worked on um, you know, things on projects like such as Webb, the Great Western Electrification Program with Network Rail. We were designing the DSCC cabinets, going a bit technical there, but I mean, for electrical students, it's an LV cabinet of sorts that controls the network connection. Um, and yeah, worked on bit on the RATS program, the Rationalized Auto Transformer program, with again that's in the 4 months. Looked at the design standards, and I mean, it's not like they're gonna put you straight into work. I realized when you get in there, there are times you're thinking, oh well, maybe the time's not going as fast as it should, but you just need to keep yourself busy in the first month or so. Just make sure you get all the knowledge you can because it's
Mm.
sort of like a grace period. And yeah, once
Mm.
the 4 months were over, then we got into rotational placement. So um, there were other key areas in the programs, but I was in the design phase. I could go into, let's say, the project delivery side of things or the project management side of things, the testing and the commissioning. The site guys more or less go to the site and see what goes on in there.
Mm. Mm.
The finance side of things. So as I said, the next 8 months were more or less just me going around the business, getting in different areas, honing my skills more or less,
Mm.
and yeah, that's that's
Yeah.
that's how it went. And the last year was mainly just making sure you have the skills that you need before you move up the ladder to a design engineer.
And I guess you've stayed there ever since. So I mean,
Yes.
what's that been like? What's that kind of journey been like? I guess since completing the graduate program, well, how has that
Um,
developed for you? I guess.
well, the thing is, there's a lot more responsibility once the graduate program ended, and whereas previously you did the designs, then you had a senior engineer look at it, and then he had a senior engineer to look at it before it went to the manager. So there was a sort of cycle. But now you're sending the designs directly to a manager and maybe to the client as well, who has a look at it directly and says, well, you know what, this is how it should be, and this is how it should be. So let's just say the focus is a lot more compared to maybe it was whilst I was in the graduate scheme. You're a lot more protected, more or less, by the company. But now you are supposed to be aware of the client requirements of what the client wants, and yeah, I said you just need to be completely aware of every time, and
Mm.
um, yeah, it's just about making sure that you utilize your knowledge, resources you have, and be observant of details.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
No, I mean that's really useful kind of reflection. I mean, and we sort of come back, I guess, yeah, back to that transition a little bit. As sort of a international student, international graduate, what was that like for you? How was that maybe different to perhaps some of your colleagues or peers who perhaps were, home students, UK students who were kind of going through perhaps slightly different experiences, as they graduated?
Um, as well as an international student, first you're on a sponsorship by the company, so it's you need to be able to produce the goods as well to make sure that they renew your visa. So there was always that sort of pressure on me, to be honest. And yeah, I know probably home students would see it differently, but the working culture I was from was completely different
Mm.
uh, from maybe here in the UK. I mean, I was raised in Saudi Arabia, so I am of Pakistani descent, but I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. And the working culture there is a complete opposite to what maybe the UK is. I mean, you do your standard 8 to 5 jobs there, but it's a lot more grind, a lot less time to socialize out with friends and colleagues, more or less get to know them, and yeah, as I said, having grown into that environment, maybe that's what I thought this environment was going to be.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, as I said, it came of a cultural shock that what is a lot more tolerance compared to
Mm.
maybe uh, back home. But as I said, people one in Saudi Arabia may not agree with me. Some of them may not. But as I said, that's what I saw, or that's what
Yeah.
my opinion of it is. And yeah, I hear things have changed now for the better,
Mm.
which I'm really glad. And yeah,
So as you say, there's that kind of cultural adaptation, I guess, to that working culture in the UK. And I suppose the other things you mentioned is also, as an international student coming to the end of your degree, there's that actually adapting to the application process for jobs being slightly different because you've got that sponsorship to kind of consider. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? What was that like if you're coming to the end of the degree and seeking out, I guess, opportunities that were able to give you that kind of visa sponsorship or ability to kind of continue working in the UK?
think I'm gonna be honest here. Think the it's a mistake that I made, to be honest, in my career, and I wish someone had told me earlier. But obviously, I'm not sure now. Obviously, you have those post-study work visas, so it's not so much of a big deal. But back in my day, when the Home Office was very strict in terms of post-study work, or there was no post-study work after degrees. So what I made a mistake was, well, I waited all the way up to June to when my exams finished or my results came out, and then I started applying for jobs. But by then you realize, well, the companies that offer sponsorship aren't a lot in the market. There are very select few companies that offer sponsorship. I mean, even in those that are listed in this tier 2 sponsorship list, some of them would go on and say, well, we don't offer sponsors for graduates because you're fresh out of university. Would rather
Mm.
go and hire someone that's has maybe, well, 10 times your experience, and yeah, I mean,
Mm.
so those were the challenges. There were, as I said, if you look at the ratio, there were 99 rejections and one just that's how the interview, or that's how competitive the market
Mm.
was
Mm.
for
Mm.
me, especially. Um, and then there are jobs as well that are not even on the shortage occupation list, because for you to have been issued a tier 2 visa, you need the job to have been on the shortage occupation list. Thankfully, they've now expanded the list a lot more compared to what it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So coming back to my the summer of 2017 was when I started applying for jobs, and I realized, well, you know what, there's not a lot of jobs available, and by that time, I said, well, I don't have a lot of time, so either I could go back home to Saudi Arabia, or start my master's. But thankfully, so I chose the latter option. I started my master's, but this time around, if I'm being really honest, I started applying for jobs in October, Novemberish, and that's when I applied to UKPN at that time. So I applied to. There were three stages initially. So the first stage was a reasoning test, maybe, or and the second stage was a video interview where you would record. Uh, they gave us 3 or 4 sets of questions that you would record your answers on it. The final step was a face-to-face interview where there'd be things like group activities of how well you perform in a group, or problem solving, for example, on real life problems that UKPN faces. So I mean, all this process takes you all the way up to April. Was it April? No, was it? I think it was February, March-ish. And April is when they tell you that yes, you've got the job, basically. And yeah, so if you look at it, if you're applying for jobs all the way down in June, then you're not getting a lot of opportunities. That's not saying you won't get any, but it's the likelihood of a company that just you're seeking sponsorship of is there going to be very, very few left, to be honest. But as I said, I was back in my day. These days, it's slightly different. There are a lot more companies that offer sponsorship, and yeah, the shortage occupation list has grown considerably as well. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah, and as you say, yeah, some slight differences now, in terms of we now have the graduate immigration route. There's kind of those 2 years sort of post-study where international students can apply for that, post-study visa. And as you said, there are certain things that may have changed around, the kind of loosening of restrictions around the shortage occupation list. But as you said, back then, you had 4 months after the end of the, degree, very, very short time in which to kind of secure sponsorship. And what you've said there is actually a really interesting kind of approach that you'd kind of learned from that previous graduate recruitment cycle and went, well, actually, I'm going to do the master's. There's a reason for me doing it, but also now I'm in a position where I can manage that recruitment process a little bit more in a timely way, I guess. Yeah.
To be fair, UKPN, they didn't even have a look at my master's, essentially. All they said was, well, they were interested in what I did in my bachelor's. And I remember vividly asking for them in April that, well, have I met all the requirements you need? And they're like, oh, yeah, we're not interested in your master's. All we need to know is what you did in your bachelor's, and we're keeping you on the basis of that. And so, yeah, I mean, whilst I'm grateful to Coventry for giving me the master's degree, but let's be honest, Huddersfield deserve most of the credit here.
But that's also really good advice about the kind of intention behind doing a master's, because I think we hear from a lot of students and graduates who go, I'll do one because it'll definitely make me more employable. And we're obviously always very cautious to say, well, actually, look into it. Will it make you more employable? Are employers in your industry actually looking for a master's? And how can you kind of start to sort of explore that and find that out? So it's a really kind of good reflection to hear that from you too. I mean, you mentioned there obviously about things that you're able to bring when applying for jobs, as a general graduate. What do you think, kind of from the perspective of an international student or an international graduate, you were maybe able to bring, to the company that you work for now that perhaps, home students might not be able to bring, some of those extra things that you actually have, as an international graduate?
100%. I think the main thing that that stood me out was, if I'm being fair, is the 1 year placement that I did, and credit to the Careers and Employability Service for getting me that placement. We'll come more into that later, but yeah, I mean, I thought the placement and the internships that I did were really, really helpful in terms of distinguishing me from, let's say, the rest of the pack. And there ought to be honest, because at the end of the day, you're showing your employers that, oh, well, you're willing to go one step further during that gap year. I mean, you could have just gone on a good vacation, to be honest, in that 3 months instead of doing an internship. But yeah, no, I agree with the fact that when the employees look into an international graduate, the first thing they see is, well, language barriers, but they also see sort of work ethic, to be honest. I mean, uh, that sort of work ethic that is probably associated with the international graduates is not very common, if I'm being honest. The UK, don't get me wrong, there is a work ethic, but in the UK, what I felt is the approach is to be efficient rather than, you know, hardworking, more or less. So, it's not your typical 9 to 5 job, whereas in the Middle East, it's more or less you can do your job between 9 to 12 or 9 to 1,
Yeah.
and then work on yourself maybe in the rest of the time. Whereas the culture that I know is, well, 9 to 5 you give 120% of your job,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean there's a bit of a innovation as well. I agree, because you're always looking to shorten the time that it takes to do a job, whereas uh, back home, it's more or less, if you're doing this thing for about 20 years, you're supposed to do the same thing for the next 20 years as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, again, as I said, it was back in my day. Now I believe there's been a whole radical
Yeah.
change. So, yeah, I
But
mean, I think that's one of the things.
it's really interesting to hear you say that, though, because I think you've identified there as well those benefits of UK employers having international students and graduates in their workforce, is that you're able to bring, as you said, different perspectives, different work ethic, different approaches to work, and
Hmm.
that kind of idea of having those sort of diverse teams. Not only, as you said, were you learning from the way that maybe the UK method was, but also you were able to bring that approach from your own background
Yeah.
that probably
Yeah,
adds value.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, as I said, it's getting the best out of both worlds, I would say. And certainly a graduate program that these companies have, even though a lot of them, you might hear some of them say, well, oh, well, you know what, graduates are a lot harder to maintain than well, people that have been there for about 20, 30 years may complain, oh, well, you know what, we don't have degrees, but why are we
Yeah.
getting that sort of thing? But it's about bringing that fresh ideas,
Mm.
because at the end of the day, person that comes in new might have a different perspective
Mm.
on things. They might have a fresh outlook on the method, rather than someone that's been there for 20 years. He might say, well, my way is the right way, but at the
Yeah.
end of the
Yeah.
day, it
Yeah.
all depends on the perspective, really.
Mm.
And
Mm.
being an international graduate student, that's looking at it from your culture or from your background, is a
Mm.
completely different way. So, well, people may complain, well, the likes of why UK is known as the most popular places, more or less, in terms of the students to come in here, because at the end of the day, it's a culture that helps you adapt easily into it. There's no way, there's no I'll find the exact word, but more or less you can adapt or mesh into the culture much more easily, and the tolerance is a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
less. So, people listen to your ideas. They feel, well, you know what, he's bringing in a fresh perspective. Whereas
Yeah.
I don't know about the rest of them, but as it compared to the other countries, maybe there's a set way of doing things, and they expect you to do that set way of doing stuff.
I mean, that's really positive to hear, because I think most, probably most kind of people certainly work in the UK university sector would say they see on a kind of daily basis the value that international students and graduates bring, and I think sometimes it doesn't always kind of get shared, I guess, further afield in the press or in the media in the UK. I think sometimes kind of people who don't work with sort of kind of international colleagues, they don't always understand just how valuable that can be, having those different perspectives. So it's great to kind of hear that reflected
Well,
from your point of view.
yeah, I think the companies realize that, to be honest, is a hidden truth, to be honest. Whether if you ask the companies, they'd be like, well, yes, the international graduates bring a lot more value. Again, not not I don't want to harm any home students out here, but I think the hidden truth is that the companies realize the value that an international student can bring in. As I said, it's a fresh perspective to things, and who knows, we
Yeah.
have a I mean, things are changing in the UK. We have a first Indian-born, well, not an Indian-born, but of Indian descent British Prime Minister, which was never unheard of, if you look at the
Yeah.
other countries. So, yeah, I mean, as I said, the UK has been very open, very diverse. And yeah, that's why it is the most popular destination that international students choose.
No, that's great. I mean, yeah, as you were saying, it's not necessarily about that comparison, is it? But it's about complementing. It's about sort of companies having that complementary workforce, that mixture of kind of home UK workers, international workers. Really be able to bring those kind of different ideas together. And brilliant to hear, the sort of positive reflections from your career journey.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've already given some great advice there, both for sort of international students and graduates, and kind of more generally. And that leads us really nicely onto the sort of final section of the podcast, which is our underrated careers advice section. So Is there anything we haven't covered so far? Any kind of particular advice, nuggets of information you'd like to sort of share with any Huddersfield students or graduates or anyone else who might be watching the podcast?
Well, the Huddersfield first year students, whatever CV you have got cooked up, just just put it aside for a minute, go to the Careers Employability Service and make sure you narrow your 4 pages CV down to a page or a half or 1.5 page. Because I mean that's a mistake I made. I put in loads and buckets loads of information in there. And I think it was Fran Rimmer at that time. He was the he was working in, I'm not sure if he's there or not, but
Yeah, Fran is still at the university, so we'll give her a
yes,
shout out on the podcast. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
So Fran Rimmer at the time, she was very yeah, she helped narrow down my 4 pages CV to maybe 1 page, and she's like, well, do you realize that's not how they do CVs in the UK here? Right? I'm like, I have no clue, to be honest. But no, I think she sort of put in concise information in there, help me narrow down the vocabulary, what needs to go in there. Because at the end of the day, CV is something that your employee is probably going to look at it for about 2-3 minutes, and then that's it. He'll have a rough idea of what he wants. The main thing is the interview that comes in later on, and that's when you decide, well, whether or not you're a viable or suitable candidate. But CV is just to get, just so they're aware of what sort of person they're looking at before they get into interview. So if you write in 4 pages of CV, it's yeah, you're getting nowhere, to be honest. But I think that's one of the things that I initially struggle with before that, because I didn't realize what was wrong with my CV. But that's the Careers and Employability Service were really helpful. The next thing was placements, to be honest. I was very, very surprised because we don't have a placement culture back home. I mean, there are internships, you would do 2-3 month internships, but you never have these year-long placements, which are so underrated in today's market. Because if you do like a year-long placement, it just sets you up perfectly for a job. I've had a couple of my friends of my whilst I was studying in the university, who've done their placements, and then they've offered full-time jobs whilst they were doing their final year of bachelor's. They didn't even need to go to the master's program like myself. They just got
Yeah.
it instantly. Um, but no, the placements are such an underrated aspect of that. So yeah, I mean, the same rule applies if you're looking for the placement. Second year, start applying way early on in September, October, November, because that's when the big companies will hire those summer or internships or summer long interns or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I think if I have to give an advice, whether it's jobs or internships or placements, start in the September, October session. Do not
Mm.
leave it till June or April or May, because trust me, you may get something, but the chances are you won't. I mean, the terms of experience you're looking for and the industry you're
Mm.
looking for, you're better off just applying it way early on.
It's giving you more options, isn't it? The earlier you start, you're going to have more potential kind of placements or graduate jobs, as you said, to apply for. Obviously, the later you start, you're potentially limiting those options. So yeah, I think it's really good advice.
Yeah, I mean, in general, as I said, I mean, they helped me with the interview questions as well. So whilst I got I used to have these job offers. I mean, I think I don't want to name a company, but there was
No.
this one company that I got the interview out, and yeah, so we prepared. I sat down with the Careers and Employability Services, and I'm sure if you look through the photos, you'll find me there in one of them with a laptop in hand. I went through all the questions, something that they sent through, and I sat down with the employability services, checking with them. Well, this is the interview questions that came out. What's your thoughts on it? And prepared the answers. We help with the vocabulary. I think that's one of the main things that we do. We tend to look at difficult words, thinking it'll impress the
Yeah.
employees. No, it does not work like that, guys. It's using concise words and keeping it short and simple and making sure you get your message across to the interviewees. So yeah, we sat down with the Careers Employability Service. We took down all the questions and the answers. They had a look at it and said, "Well, you're ready to go." So yeah, I thought it's you we weren't told these things,
Mm. Mm.
or or even if we were told, we just didn't take
Yeah.
too much of a notice, thinking, well, it's studies first, let's get to the academics first, and then we'll think about work. But no, I mean, my advice is the two things go side by side, and they always should go side by side. I mean, if you're in the university, it means you're already made up your mind on what you want to achieve further in your career. So, might as well just do both things side by side, I guess.
It's cracking advice, Hamza, and a great plug for the Careers Employability Service, but also a really important point about, particularly as an international student coming in, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Like different labour markets can be quite different in terms of, as you said, how CVs are structured, maybe how the placement or internship market works, or if it even exists in particular countries. So, that idea, as you said, of kind of, when you come into university, you are effectively an early career professional in that industry. You're not just a student. And so treating it, as you said, the two things side by side, really, really important. I'm sure we're going to have lots of international students and graduates watching this who are potentially going to be going, I might want to get in touch with Hamza. If people want to find you kind of anywhere on the internet or elsewhere, where's the best place to kind of get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Feel free to get in touch with me, LinkedIn. I mean, that's the one professional site. So yeah, just drop me a quick message, or send me a text. Again, I won't review your CVs for you guys. That's for the Careers and Employability Services to do. But if you have any advice on what to do in your career, or if you have any interviews coming up or something, just drop in a quick text, and I'll help you in terms of, this is what you can do, this is what you can look at. But again, the best person would be the Careers and Employability Service. They help me out. I'm just a messenger here.
It sounds like we've paid you money here, Hamza.
You haven't. I'm just relaying my experiences and
Right.
my regrets, because at the end of the day, you want the next generation of students or engineers to come in and do better than you did, or have less obstacles than you did. I mean, that's what my wish is, to be honest, that that there were roadblocks in mine. I wish someone had sat in there in this forum of sorts and said these things. And it's always helpful when someone who's been through the experience just tells you, rather than, which is a misconception. Whereas someone like maybe a home student went up and said these things, you wouldn't take much notice of. But coming in from an international student, I feel that, and I agreed to do this because, well, I said this is not what's that's not very well told, not even in universities. I feel that universities could do a lot more in terms of letting the international students know more about the labor markets, about things like tier 2 sponsor lists, the shortage occupation list. I said it comes in from both sides, but it's I feel work needs to be done on both sides.
Well, you're certainly starting that process, Hamza, and I mean, great offer of support there. What we will do is we'll make sure we kind of pin your LinkedIn details on the screen once people are watching the podcast, and also the details about how to get in touch with the Careers and Employability Service at Huddersfield, which, shameless plug, we now offer on a lifelong basis for graduates. So do take advantage of that. But Hamza, that brings us really nicely to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, becoming the newest member of the Hud Grad Club, and obviously we wish you best of luck with everything moving forward.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you, Chris, and I wish good luck to all the new international graduates coming in, or new joinees coming in. And again, just whilst all these things are important to look at the academic and the work aspect of it, just do take your time to enjoy the university experience as well. I don't think I've spoken enough about it, but take your time. I mean, Huddersfield is vibrant with nightlife as well. As I said, just sometimes it's also important to go with the flow rather than just plan your things around. You need to be spontaneous as well. So, thank you so much for having me, Chris. And
and I mean, great note to end on. Make the most of your experience. If you're a student or graduate watching this, really make the most of that experience. And Hamza, we'll hopefully see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoyed the podcast? Then go to the University of Huddersfield YouTube channel for all of our future episodes. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to hit the bell button for notifications. If you'd like to be involved in the Hud Grad Club podcast moving forward, please get in touch with us on alumni@hud.ac.uk.